Have you noticed something strange? The moment you stop speaking, the whole illusion starts to crack. Not just the illusion about them. The illusion about love. About closure. About who cared. About how modern relationships really work. Because in a world full of performative affection, instant replies, fake vulnerability, and carefully staged emotion, silence does something brutal. It reveals. It reveals who was only enjoying access. Who liked being wanted, but not being responsible. Who loved your attention more than they loved your presence. Who kept you emotionally available while they stayed conveniently undefined. And if you are in no contact right now, I know what that silence can feel like. It can feel like withdrawal. Like panic at 11:47 p.m. when you check your phone even though you already know there's nothing there. Like opening their profile for the 5th time in a day just to see if they posted something that might secretly be about you. Like telling yourself you just need one answer, one message, one final conversation, when deep down you already know the conversation was over long before the silence began. But here is the truth most people never say clearly enough. No contact is not hard because you miss them. It is hard because silence forces you to face yourself without distraction. And that is exactly why it can become one of the most powerful turning points of your life. In this video, I want to walk with you through 10 truths about staying strong during no contact. Not the shallow version. Not the internet version that turns silence into a game, or a trick, or a manipulation tactic. I'm talking about the deeper version. The one that forces you to see how attachment works, how emotional dependence steals your center, and how fake modern intimacy trains people to confuse access with love. And stay with me to the end, because the last truth is the one most people avoid. It is also the one that can finally give you the peace you've been trying to get from another person. This is not about getting them back. This is about getting yourself back. 1. The real challenge of no contact. The hardest part of no contact is not the silence. It is the meaning you attach to the silence. That is where most people fall apart. They sit in a quiet room, stare at a screen, replay old conversations, and then begin writing stories in their head. Maybe they've moved on. Maybe I meant nothing. Maybe they found someone better. Maybe I should have said less. Maybe I should have apologized. Maybe I loved too much. Maybe I was too cold. Maybe I wasn't enough. And once the mind starts creating stories, silence turns into a courtroom. Suddenly every memory becomes evidence. Every delay becomes rejection. Every unanswered message from the past becomes proof that you were never valued. But that is not reality. That is pain trying to narrate your life. Human beings hate uncertainty. We would often rather hear something painful than sit with something unfinished. We say we want truth, but what we usually want is relief. And silence offers neither comfort nor explanation. It gives you nothing to hold. That's why it feels so cruel. But sometimes no answer is the answer. Sometimes the absence of effort tells you more than words ever could. I want you to think about how many people stay emotionally trapped not because a relationship was beautiful, but because it was unclear. No big ending. No honest confession. No clean goodbye. Just mixed signals, partial effort, occasional warmth, disappearing acts, and the quiet arrogance of someone who expects you to keep waiting while they keep deciding. That kind of silence can make a person feel insane. Because now you are not only grieving the person. You are grieving the fantasy. The future you built in your mind. The version of them you kept defending. The story you kept hoping would still turn in your favor. That is the challenge. No contact is not just about not reaching out. It is about surviving the stories your mind tells you when nobody is giving you clarity. And this is where your strength begins. Because if you can learn to stop worshiping your own worst assumptions, you take your life back. The next time your mind starts spiraling, pause and ask yourself a better question. Is this what I know, or is this what pain is inventing? That one question can save you from hours of emotional self-destruction. Because silence is not always abandonment. Sometimes it is exposure. Exposure of what was fragile. Exposure of what was one-sided. Exposure of how much of your self-worth had quietly become tied to another person's attention. And yes, that realization hurts. But it also clears the fog. 2. Emotional detachment is not coldness, it is recovery of power. One of the most dangerous things that can happen in a relationship is this: you slowly begin handing someone else the remote control to your emotional state. If they text, you breathe easier. If they don't, your stomach drops. If they sound warm, your whole day changes. If they sound distant, you lose focus, appetite, and peace. That is not love in its healthiest form. That is nervous system dependency dressed up as romance. And modern culture encourages it. It teaches people to glorify obsession, overanalysis, emotional overexposure, and constant access. It rewards the person who is always available, always understanding, always willing to bend, always willing to explain again, forgive again, wait again. But the truth is darker than most people want to admit. The person who needs more usually loses more. Not because they are weaker as a human being, but because dependency creates imbalance. And imbalance invites disrespect. People feel when they are your emotional center. They feel when your mood depends on them. They feel when one message from them can rescue your whole identity for the day. And whether they mean to or not, that shifts the power. So when I say emotional detachment, I am not telling you to become numb. I am not telling you to become cruel. I am not telling you to stop caring like a machine. I am telling you to stop placing your inner stability in someone else's hands. That is very different. Detachment means I can feel this pain without letting it own me. I can miss you without chasing you. I can love what was real without begging for what is no longer here. I can accept that your choices reveal you, not my worth. That kind of detachment is not cold. It is mature. It is grounded. It is the moment your emotions stop running the entire government of your life. And there is something else people rarely say out loud. Detachment makes you clearer. When you are emotionally entangled, you interpret everything through hunger. A breadcrumb feels like hope. A random like feels like meaning. A late night text feels like fate. A weak apology feels like growth. But once you detach, you start seeing with brutal accuracy. You stop asking, what did they mean? You start asking, what are their patterns? You stop asking, what if I lose them? You start asking, why was I willing to lose myself? And that shift changes everything. So if you want to begin detaching, start here. Create mental distance, not just physical distance. When your mind drifts toward them, do not shame yourself. Just redirect. Back to your body. Back to your work. Back to the task in front of you. Back to the life that still exists outside this wound. Go lift something heavy. Go take a walk without your phone. Go sit with a notebook and write the truth instead of the fantasy. Go clean the room you've been emotionally rotting in. Go handle the part of your life you've been neglecting while your mind has been camping in someone else's absence. That is how detachment begins. Not with a dramatic speech. With repetition. With redirection. With choosing yourself often enough that your nervous system finally learns, I am safe even when they are gone. 3. Trusting your decision when fear starts lying. The first few days of no contact can feel almost clean. There is pain, yes. But there is also a kind of clarity. A decision has been made. A boundary has been set. Something in you finally got tired of bleeding in circles. Then fear shows up. Fear always comes later, dressed like reason. What if I overreacted? What if they think I never cared? What if this pushes them away forever? What if they were just confused? What if I'm the one who ruined it by walking away? And because you are already hurting, fear sounds intelligent. But most of the time, it is not logic speaking. It is withdrawal speaking. It is old attachment demanding relief. It is the frightened part of you that would rather return to dysfunction than tolerate uncertainty. Trusting your decision matters because no contact is not just a tactic. It is a declaration. It says, I refuse to keep abandoning myself just because losing you scares me. And that kind of decision is hard because it asks you to break a pattern, not just a connection. Maybe your pattern was chasing clarity from unavailable people. Maybe your pattern was over-explaining your needs to someone committed to misunderstanding them. Maybe your pattern was calling inconsistency, complicated, emotional neglect, space, and disrespect a rough phase. A lot of people are not heartbroken because the relationship was extraordinary. They are heartbroken because they invested extraordinary hope into something unstable. That is an important difference. Trusting your decision means remembering what made the decision necessary in the first place. Not the best moments. Not the chemistry. Not the late-night confessions. Not the version of them you keep visiting in memory. The full truth. The confusion. The waiting. The excuses. The emotional imbalance. The way your body felt when you were constantly trying to decode their behavior. The way peace vanished from your life little by little while you kept calling it love. Write that truth down if you need to. Write what happened, not what you hoped it meant. Write what kept repeating, not what happened once on a beautiful weekend. Write the version that your lonely mind will try to erase at midnight. Because when doubt comes, and it will, you need something stronger than mood. You need evidence. And here is the deeper truth, no contact does not guarantee that they return. It guarantees something more important. It gives you the chance to return to yourself. To the part of you that wasn't always monitoring someone else's energy. To the part of you that used to think clearly. To the part of you that had goals, rhythm, appetite, humor, discipline, and dignity before all of that got swallowed by emotional confusion. So if fear whispers tonight, maybe you made a mistake, answer it calmly. No. The mistake was staying too long where my peace was being traded for possibility. 4. Discomfort is not a sign you are failing. Most people break no contact for one simple reason. They do not know how to sit in discomfort without trying to make it disappear immediately. That is the real issue. Not love. Not destiny. Not unfinished business. Discomfort. The urge to text is rarely about communication. It is about relief. You want the pressure to stop. You want the uncertainty to stop. You want your chest to unclench. You want the silent room, the empty bed, the unshared routine, the missing voice, the broken pattern. You want all of it to stop hurting right now. And because modern life has trained us to eliminate discomfort instantly, no contact feels unbearable. We live in a world of immediate access. Immediate entertainment. Immediate distraction. Immediate validation. Immediate response. So when pain arrives and cannot be swiped away, people panic. But discomfort is not proof that you chose wrong. Often it is proof that you finally stopped numbing what needed to be faced. Think about how many people remain in unhealthy emotional dynamics simply because the familiar pain feels less threatening than the unknown peace that comes after leaving. They would rather keep receiving crumbs than sit alone long enough to realize how hungry they've been. That is what makes no contact feel so unnatural at first. It interrupts the addiction. And make no mistake, some relationships function like addictions. Not because the person is evil, but because your body became used to the cycle. Hope. Confusion. Relief. Distance. Panic. Attention. Withdrawal. That cycle can become chemically familiar. Which is why silence feels like detox. But detox is not death. It is the process of getting your system back. So when discomfort rises, do something most people never learn to do. Stay. Stay with the wave instead of obeying it. Stay with the urge instead of worshipping it. Stay in the room long enough to discover that a feeling can peak and pass without controlling your behavior. That is how self-respect is built. Not through inspirational quotes. Through endured moments. The moment you wanted to text and didn't. The moment you almost checked their page and stopped. The moment you cried and still didn't crawl backward. The moment you felt the ache but refused to make pain the decision maker. Every one of those moments is a brick. And eventually those bricks become a different kind of identity. Someone steadier. Someone less reactive. Someone who no longer confuses emotional urgency with truth. So do not misread discomfort. It is not saying, go back. It is often saying, keep going. You are finally leaving the prison. 5. Purpose must become stronger than the need to be chosen. One of the saddest things no contact reveals is how much life people postpone while waiting to be chosen. They delay their peace. Delay their discipline. Delay their healing. Delay their goals. Delay their identity. All because some part of them keeps believing, once this person sees my value, everything will settle. But here is the brutal reality. A person can recognize your value and still not choose you well. A person can admire you and still mishandle you. A person can miss you and still not be safe for you. That is why living for validation is such a losing game. Validation is unstable because it depends on another person's mood, maturity, timing, wounds, and intentions. Purpose is different. Purpose gives your energy somewhere honorable to go. And during no contact, that matters more than people realize. Because if your only focus is whether they are thinking about you, then your entire inner world remains trapped in reaction. You are still orbiting them, even in silence. Purpose breaks the orbit. Purpose asks better questions. What can I build now? What part of my life have I neglected? What standard have I lowered? What dream got placed on pause while I was busy overinvesting in a relationship that kept me emotionally unstable? This is where the script changes. Instead of waking up and checking whether they viewed your story, you wake up and ask what needs to be done. Instead of performing healing online, you build something real offline. Instead of trying to make them regret losing you, you become too engaged in your own growth to keep rehearsing revenge in your head. And yes, let's say the quiet part out loud, some people only seem attractive because your life has become too empty outside them. That is not an insult. That is a wake-up call. When purpose leaves your life, obsession enters easily. So restore purpose. Maybe that begins small. A consistent workout routine. A walk every morning before you touch your phone. A business plan you kept delaying. A career move you've been avoiding. A class. A skill. A creative project. A return to prayer. A return to structure. A return to your own standards. Purpose does not need to be dramatic to be powerful. It just needs to be real enough to compete with obsession. Because once a person begins rebuilding their own life, something changes. They stop asking, why wasn't I enough? They start asking, why did I make someone else the center of a life I was supposed to lead? That is a much more powerful question. And the irony is this, when you stop living to be chosen, you become far more solid, far more grounded, far more attractive, not only to others, but to yourself. That matters most. Because the goal of no contact is not to become more desirable to the person who left. It is to become more aligned with the life you almost abandoned while trying to be loved. 6. Resilience is built in private, not performed in public. We talk about resilience as if it is a personality trait some people are lucky enough to have. It is not. Resilience is built quietly. Unromantically. Usually when nobody is watching. It is built in the mornings when you wake up heavy and still get out of bed. It is built when you go to work carrying grief no one can see. It is built when you answer emails with a steady tone while part of you is still breaking. It is built when you put your phone down at night and choose sleep over self-sabotage. It is built when you stop turning every emotional storm into a public performance. That last part matters. Because we live in a culture that confuses exposure with healing. People document pain before they digest it. They post strength before they build it. They want to look unbothered before they've actually become stable. But resilience does not care how you look. It cares what you repeat. Do you repeat self-betrayal? Or self-trust? Do you keep reopening the wound? Or do you let time and discipline do their work? Every time you resist the urge to break no contact, you are building emotional endurance. Every time you choose your long-term peace over temporary relief, you are proving something to yourself that no one else can prove for you. I can survive this. That sentence becomes a turning point. Not because it sounds dramatic. Because once your body starts believing it, panic loses its throne. And you do not need grand gestures to build resilience. You need ritual. A daily structure. A place to put your thoughts. A physical practice that returns you to your body. A few non-negotiables that remind you that your life still belongs to you. Maybe that means journaling every morning before the world enters your head. Maybe it means the gym at 6 a.m. because pain metabolizes differently when the body is moving. Maybe it means one honest phone call a week with a friend who won't feed your fantasies. Maybe it means deleting shortcuts to their profile because discipline should not always have to fight convenience. Resilience is practical. It asks, what systems are helping you stay strong when emotion gets loud? Build those systems. Because the truth is, no contact does not become easier just because time passes. It becomes easier because identity changes. Because your habits begin supporting your healing. Because your standards begin protecting what your emotions once endangered. And over time, something beautiful happens. The silence stops feeling like rejection. It starts feeling like room. Room to think. Room to breathe. Room to repair. Room to remember that you are not as fragile as heartbreak first convinced you that you were. That is resilience. Not the absence of pain. The refusal to let pain rewrite your character. 7. Acceptance is where the fantasy finally loses power. There comes a point in every healing process where the real battle is no longer with the other person. It is with reality. And reality is often painful not because it is cruel, but because it is clean. It removes all the extra stories. Maybe they did not choose you the way you chose them. Maybe they liked your presence but not your depth. Maybe they enjoyed your loyalty while offering inconsistency in return. Maybe they did care, but not enough to grow, communicate, or stay accountable. Maybe they simply were not who you kept hoping they would become. Acceptance means allowing those truths to exist without immediately trying to soften them into something easier to digest. That is hard. Because hope can be addictive. Even false hope. Especially false hope. False hope keeps people emotionally employed in dead situations. It makes them overanalyze old texts, revisit old locations, reread old promises, and keep one emotional foot in the doorway of something that is no longer alive. But acceptance closes the door. Not with bitterness. With clarity. It says, I do not need to demonize you to stop idealizing you. That is powerful. Because many people think healing requires hatred. It doesn't. Hatred is often just attachment wearing armor. Real acceptance is quieter. It is the day you stop bargaining with facts. The relationship was what it was. Not what it could have been. Not what it almost became. Not what you were willing to sacrifice to keep alive. Just what it was. And for many people, that realization is the most painful one of all. Because it means grieving honestly. Not grieving the person alone, but grieving your misreadings, your overextensions, your tolerance, your fantasy, your self-abandonment, your wish that love would be enough to transform someone who had no intention of meeting you at your level. That is not a small grief. So be patient with yourself here. Acceptance is not a switch. It is a sequence. You see a little more clearly. Then you relapse into fantasy. Then you see clearly again. Then one day the truth lands more deeply than the illusion, and something in you finally stops running. If it helps, write the truths you have been avoiding. Not poetic truths. Specific truths. I felt anxious more than I felt secure. I kept excusing patterns that hurt me. I chased clarity from someone committed to confusion. I confused chemistry with safety. I stayed because I was afraid of loss, not because I was at peace. I was trying to save something that only one of us was carrying. Read those truths when nostalgia becomes selective. Because nostalgia has a habit of editing out the damage and replaying only the warmth. Acceptance restores the full picture. And once the full picture returns, fantasy weakens. That is when real healing begins. 8. Pain becomes power only when it is transformed, not romanticized. Pain will either deepen you or distort you. That depends on what you do with it. A lot of people say they want to turn pain into power, but what they really do is turn pain into identity. They become the betrayed one, the abandoned one, the misunderstood one, the one who loved harder, the one who was never appreciated. And while there may be truth in that story, living inside it for too long will shrink your future. Pain is a teacher, but only if you let it instruct you. Otherwise it becomes a loop. And heartbreak has a way of showing you things that comfort never reveals. It shows you where you are still vulnerable to external validation. It shows you what patterns you tolerate when you are afraid to lose someone. It shows you what emotional habits still rule you in private. It shows you whether your self-worth is real or mostly theoretical. Those are painful discoveries. But they are useful. So instead of asking, how do I stop feeling this? Ask, what is this pain showing me about my life? Maybe it is showing you that you ignored your own loneliness for years and expected a relationship to solve it. Maybe it is showing you that your life became too centered around one person. Maybe it is showing you that you need stronger boundaries, deeper standards, better emotional discipline, a stronger community, or a more solid internal life. That is where pain becomes power. When it stops being just something that happened to you and becomes something that refined you. And that transformation is rarely glamorous. Sometimes it looks like a man sitting alone in his car after work, breathing through the urge to text, deciding not to humiliate himself for temporary relief. Sometimes it looks like a woman putting her phone in another room and finally getting through a Sunday without checking whether her ex watched her story. Sometimes it looks like someone taking all the energy they were pouring into one person and redirecting it into therapy, into prayer, into discipline, into art, into business, into parenthood, into health, into becoming whole enough that attention is no longer mistaken for love. That is real transformation. Not the quote. The behavior. And if you really want to turn pain into power, then give it direction. Move your body. Strengthen your mind. Tell the truth. Create something. Repair what this relationship made you neglect. Face the parts of yourself that still collapse when someone withdraws affection. Because one of the greatest forms of power is this. The ability to suffer without becoming smaller. And there is another level to this. Sometimes pain becomes most meaningful when it teaches you how to show up differently for others. You become more honest. More careful. More self-aware. Less performative. Less hungry. Less willing to use people the way the world often does. That is how suffering becomes wisdom. Not because pain is beautiful, but because it can clarify what matters. 9. Where attention goes, identity follows. Your attention is one of the most valuable forms of power you have. And during no contact, you find out very quickly whether you have control over it, or whether it has been hijacked. Because if your attention lives with them all day, then some part of your life is still in their hands. You can call it memory. You can call it heartbreak. You can call it care. But at a practical level, attention is energy. And energy shapes identity. If every morning begins with them, every quiet moment returns to them, every achievement is filtered through whether they would notice, and every night ends with a mental conversation that never happened, then your identity is still forming around absence. That is dangerous. Because people do not just lose relationships. They lose momentum. They lose mental sharpness. They lose creative force. They lose self-respect. They lose months, sometimes years, living in internal dialogue with someone who is no longer participating. So shifting focus is not just a coping technique. It is a rescue operation. It is the act of pulling your attention back from a place where it has been bleeding and placing it somewhere that can actually produce life. What can you build now? That question matters. What can you strengthen? What can you simplify? What can you reclaim? What can you finish that has been sitting unfinished because emotional chaos kept stealing your concentration? Maybe you have a body that needs care. Maybe you have finances that need order. Maybe you have a home that reflects how overwhelmed you've been. Maybe you have work that deserves your full mind. Maybe you have children watching how you handle pain. Maybe you have a version of yourself that has been waiting for months to be taken seriously again. Give your attention there. At first, it will feel unnatural. Your mind will keep drifting back. That is normal. Do not confuse repetition with failure. Attention is trained through redirection. Again and again and again. Every time you catch yourself spiraling, bring yourself back. Back to the page. Back to the meeting. Back to the run. Back to the meal you are making. Back to the task that builds your future instead of feeding your wound. And over time, something shifts. You stop feeling like the abandoned person in a tragic story. You start feeling like the author of a life that still has chapters left to write. That is a profound change. Because the moment your focus returns to growth, the relationship stops being the center of your emotional universe. It becomes one chapter. An important one, yes. A painful one, yes. But not the throne around which everything else must kneel. This is how self-reclamation happens. Not all at once, but through reclaimed attention. 10. Long-term peace requires standards, not just healing. The final truth is this. No contact is not successful just because you survived the silence. It is successful when you become someone who protects peace differently afterward. That is the real goal. Because what is the point of healing from one chaotic attachment if you are only going to hand your peace to the next person who arrives with charm, intensity, and inconsistent affection? Long-term peace is not built through one breakup. It is built through standards. Standards about what you tolerate. Standards about what you call love. Standards about how quickly you abandon yourself in order to keep someone close. Standards about access, boundaries, communication, consistency, self-respect, and emotional hygiene. Peace is not passive. It is maintained. And many people do not realize that because they think peace means the absence of conflict. It doesn't. Peace means you stop living in contradiction with yourself. You stop saying, "I deserve better," while accepting the same patterns. You stop saying, "I value honesty," while entertaining ambiguity. You stop saying, "I want stability," while being seduced by emotional chaos simply because it feels intense. Intensity is not intimacy. Familiarity is not safety. Attention is not care. And longing is not proof that something belongs in your future. Those lessons are expensive. No contact often teaches them the hard way. So now ask yourself, what will protect my peace going forward? Not in theory. In practice. Maybe it means no longer entertaining emotionally inconsistent people. Maybe it means slowing down before getting attached. Maybe it means noticing how your body feels around someone instead of only how strong the chemistry is. Maybe it means valuing calm over stimulation. Maybe it means refusing to romanticize people who only show up when it suits them. Maybe it means telling the truth sooner, to them and to yourself. And peace also requires nourishment. Not just boundaries against what drains you, but devotion to what steadies you. Your routines. Your sleep. Your work. Your faith. Your health. Your friendships. Your solitude. Your standards. Your private rituals that keep your nervous system from becoming easy prey for emotional chaos. Because peace is not just something you feel. It is something you structure. And once you learn that, you stop being impressed by people who disrupt you. You begin valuing what is clean. What is consistent. What is honest. What is mutual. What does not require you to betray your own inner order just to keep connection alive. That is maturity. And that is why long-term peace is one of the highest forms of strength. Not because life becomes easy, but because fewer things are allowed to own you. Underscore 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 underscore. You made it this far, and that matters. Because it means something in you is ready. Ready to stop glorifying confusion. Ready to stop negotiating with your own worth. Ready to stop mistaking silence for punishment when it may actually be the beginning of your freedom. No contact is not the story of losing someone. For many people, it is the story of finally seeing clearly. Seeing what was one-sided. Seeing what was performative. Seeing how modern relationships often reward ambiguity, emotional convenience, and image over substance. Seeing how easily good people can become trapped in dynamics where they are valued for what they provide, not for who they are. But more importantly, it is the story of seeing yourself. Your patterns. Your wounds. Your strength. Your ability to endure discomfort and still choose dignity. Your capacity to rebuild a life that no longer depends on being chosen by the wrong person. That is the real transformation. And if you are in the middle of it right now, if the nights are still long, if the silence still burns, if part of you still wants to reach for your phone and betray your own healing just to feel relief for 10 minutes, hear me clearly. You are not weak for feeling this. You are human. But you do have a choice. You can go back to the cycle and call it love. Or you can stay in the silence long enough for it to teach you what attachment was hiding from you. One path keeps you emotionally available to a wound. The other path returns you to your authority. Choose carefully. Because the version of you waiting on the other side of this is not colder. Not harder. Not bitter. Just clearer. More disciplined. More self-respecting. More difficult to manipulate through absence. More difficult to control through inconsistency. More anchored in truth than fantasy. And once you become that person, you do not beg for peace anymore. You build it. If this spoke to where you are right now, subscribe to the channel and stay close. This space is for people who are done being ruled by confusion, emotional dependency, and the false theater of modern connection. And I want to hear from you. What has no contact revealed to you, about them, or about yourself? Leave it in the comments. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is not, "I miss them." Sometimes it is, "I finally see clearly."